Alright, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to go over the concept of a metaphysical energy node, or sometimes I call it a superconscious energy node. So I use the terms interchangeably. And this phenomenon is basically related to the connection, or it's involved in the connection between the superconscious and the law of manifestation. Right? So we touched on it last video, but I didn't go too deeply into it. So I'm going to go deeply into it in this video. And as you're going to see, I believe this sort of way of looking at things, so this is all a theory, right? So it's just a theory. But I believe this way of looking at things kind of gives you more insight into the connection between the subconscious and manifestation and society as a whole. So this is kind of a way of looking at things in a more sociological perspective, right? So in sociology, they study many different aspects of society, right? What makes a society stable, right? They look at the connection between people's behaviors and culture, right? And that has to do with music, cultural practices, food, literature, things like that, right? They kind of just look at the connection between all those things and people's behavior. And this is kind of like the metaphysical version of that, right? So I like to look at this concept of a metaphysical energy node kind of allows us to see the connection between metaphysics and society as a whole and behaviors in society, right? So that's kind of how I like to look at it. And so I feel like this idea gives me that type of insight. So that's what we're going to go into. Before I go into it more directly, I just want to mention there was another girl who I didn't mention it before. Her name, I think, is Penny Whitbrecht, right? If I'm saying it right. And I believe she talks about these ideas as well. So I didn't look into it recently, right? So I don't remember exactly what she said, but I do remember her saying something to the effect of, in her near-death experience, she was basically told how thoughts affect reality. And they affect people's behaviors and how we're all connected, things like that. So you can look up her near-death experience as well. I believe what she said kind of fits, not exactly like what I'm presenting here, but it alludes to these ideas, right? Same thing with Betty Eadie, I think, in her near-death experience. Carrie Cohen, in her near-death experience, I think said something similar. So I just wanted to mention that. So to go in this first point, it says, a superconscious energy node is a highly localized region of energy in the superconscious. Right, so what does that mean to be a highly localized region? So we already know that the superconscious basically has a lot of the same properties as our subconscious, right? So the superconscious, it can have positive memory and negative memories, right? It has subjects or symbols, which are points of focus. When you focus on those subjects or symbols, you access a superconscious memory. The superconscious exerts a kind of influence on your subconscious in a way that's similar to mood, right? And based on what you're focused on, the superconscious can compel you, cause a slight compulsion on your subconscious, but it can compel you to behave in a certain way. The superconscious can have subconscious paths, and it can have spiritual energy. Right, so basically we went over that. So the superconscious has all of those principles. And so if we say that the superconscious has a highly localized region of energy, well, the first thing to recognize in order to basically break down what that means is to recognize that the superconscious has energy, right? So how much energy is in the superconscious? Well, basically it's the accumulation or the sum of everyone's energy, right? Because the superconscious is just a collection of all our subconscious minds. The more any one of us charges our subconscious, the more energy is in the superconscious. So how then does it get localized, right? Because the collection of the subconscious energy the total subconscious energy in the superconscious is just a collection of the subconscious energy of everyone really on the planet, right? What do we mean by local? Well, there's two ways that energy can get localized in the superconscious, right? So the second way we're going to talk about in the next video, so I'm not going to cover that this video. But the first way that energy can get localized basically has to do with symbols or subjects, right? So we talked about how when a lot of people focus on a particular subject or symbol, so this could be a celebrity, for example. If we're talking about subconscious path, it could be a song, it could be a character in a movie like Captain America, right? So these would be symbols that very large numbers of people focus on, right? And as they're all focusing on this particular symbol, they charge their subconscious in a particular way. And so in a sense, that symbol or that subject in the superconscious gets more energy, gets more positive. So the way it can get localized, or energy can get localized in the superconscious, is basically just by virtue of these symbols that large groups of people focus on. So for example, if I'm a celebrity, right, I get large groups of people to charge the feeling of fun, for example, while they're focused on me. Well then, in a sense, when other people focus on me later, this is the theory I'm setting up here, right? So when other people focus on me later, they'll have an easier time charging up fun, because when they focus on me, they're accessing the superconscious memory that is associated with me, and that superconscious memory is charged up at the fun frequency, right? So that's basically how it works. It's basically just very much works according to the same principles as the subconscious, with the mood and subconscious memory and things like that. So when I say something's highly localized, I'm really talking about a particular symbol in the superconscious, right? In other words, a large group of people focused on a relatively small set of symbols or categories also, so the superconscious can have categories. And when people focus on this category and they charge in a similar way they charge in a way that's very similar, then the energy in that superconscious memory grows more intense, right? Or in other words, it has much more energy. And one thing I forgot to mention, which is almost goes without say, but I'll just say it to make it more clear, is when most people focus on that symbol and they charge at the same frequency or similar frequencies, then the energy in that memory gets more intense. So if they're focusing on the symbol and they all charge different frequencies, then the energy is not very intense. And that's the same thing as the subconscious, right? So if I focus on a particular song, for example, and I charge like 10 different frequencies while focusing on a song, none of them are going to be that intense, right? So your subconscious, the intensity grows, right, when I'm charging at the same frequency. You notice a kind of resonant effect. So the same thing occurs in the superconscious, right? So it gets localized by virtue of the symbol. So now I want to go into a kind of phenomena that's related to that, which makes this very important. Now, let's say that a large number of people focus on a particular symbol, right? Let's say it's a celebrity. I'm a music artist and I'm a performer, and lots of people focus on me and listen to my music. And what's going to happen is, let's say I'm new, right? Because the superconscious develops negative memory. If I'm new to American culture and consciousness, right, then it's going to be very easy for large groups of people to focus on me and charge energy. So that's like the natural volatility. All new things have a natural volatility, even if they don't have a lot of positive memory yet. So if I'm a new artist and I put out music and I get millions of people to focus on me, then let's say the frequency that I'm generally putting out in terms of like the music I'm creating, let's say it's like party music, right? Large numbers of people focus on me and they charge a party feeling or party frequency. Well, something very interesting happens, right? When those people charge the party frequency while focused on me, right, what ends up happening is more and more millions of people, let's say it's millions of people, as more and more people do that, then the superconscious memory that I represent gains more positive memory. And that's going to make it easier for other people to focus on me and charge up at the fun frequency. And as they do it, then my memory gets even more positive. And as my memory gets more positive, then the superconscious will exert a kind of influence on even other people, and it'll exert that influence even more powerfully, right? Because the superconscious memory I represent got more positive, I got more energy. So that made the compulsion or the influence of the superconscious even stronger. As that influence got even stronger, more people felt an even stronger compulsion to focus on me and have fun. And so you see, it's kind of a feedback loop, right? And this is very similar to the feedback loop in our own subconscious. If I keep focusing on some subject and I keep entering transcendental state and charging, my subconscious stores more energy in my short-term memory. And my short-term memory, my subconscious, as a result, compels my conscious mind even more powerfully, right, to think in a certain way while focused on a subject. And as I choose to think that way while focused on a subject, I enter a transcendental state. My subconscious charges a little more. The subconscious memory becomes more positive, and that stores more energy in my superconscious. on my subconscious. My subconscious compels me more powerfully, and then it's a feedback loop, right? So that feedback loop is generally only broken by virtue of negative memory from your body, otherwise you would charge forever, or it's broken by just taking my mind off the subject I was focused on and choosing not to think in the way my subconscious is compelling me to. If I choose not to do that, the subconscious memory switches to a passive state, then the energy discharges. So the same thing can happen in the superconscious, right? So the superconscious, you can have this feedback loop. When large groups of people focus on some symbol, that symbol will get more energy. Then that energy in the superconscious will affect people to focus on. It'll influence or compel them to focus on that symbol even more strongly. And as they give into that urge to focus on it because it's more strong, they focus on the symbol again. They charge even more because they get a boost from the superconscious. And that puts more positive memory in the superconscious memory, and that increases the compulsion in the superconscious, and it's a feedback loop. So in other words, an energy node, so what I call an energy node represents basically a growing form of energy in the superconscious, right, that results from that continuous feedback loop, right, of energy. And basically of energy and back and forth charging between the superconscious and people who focus on a symbol in the superconscious. So in a sense, it's like self-sustaining in a way, right? It's self-sustaining and it grows. So when you can have this on a very low scale, like let's say I'm a celebrity and only the people in the neighborhood know me, this might occur, right? It might still occur, but you can imagine it's probably not going to have a lot of energy. And no one person can make a subconscious memory in the superconscious very strong, right? But let's say large number of people, right? So millions and millions and millions of people are adding energy to this one symbol in the superconscious. Well, it's going to have a huge amount of energy, right? Far more than any one would be possible with any one person or a small group of people. And so what ends up happening when a large number of people add an enormous amount of energy into some symbol or set of symbols or categories, and that's what I mean by localized region, what happens when a huge amount of energy gets added to a set of symbols in the superconscious? Well, that's what I want to talk about in this video, right? Basically, what ends up happening is, I kind of already went over it, but what's an important consequence of this energy node increasing its compulsion on people in society through its symbols is that it controls how reality manifests, right? So this plays a very important role in the nature of manifestation, right? So when a superconscious energy node forms, right, because it takes a while to form, you need that feedback loop to happen enough times, right? Now, the superconscious is very dynamic. It consists of many different people. They're focused on different symbols at different times. They're charging different frequencies, and so you don't get this resonant effect needed. It's hard to get that resonant effect between people's intentions and what they're charging while focused on a single thing or a single set of things or categories. It's hard to get that, right? It's hard to get it and build it enough that you get an energy node. Because think of it, when it grows enough, you get that feedback loop effect. And when you get that feedback loop enough, it starts to be self-sustaining, right? And then it becomes an energy node. And once it's self-sustaining, it'll keep influencing people to keep focusing on this subject, and it increases the strength of that compulsion, so it's harder for them to resist. And when they give into it, they focus on it, enter a transcendental state, and they just add more energy to it and just continuously grows, right? So it can almost grow out of control at times, and we're going to actually talk about that in this video. But what this energy node is going to do as it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, or grows more and more and more, it's going to increase the strength of its compulsion. Now, to us, the strength of that compulsion is always going to feel relatively, it's not going to feel overly strong that we think we're being possessed by something, but I do believe it can get very strong, and at the level of our subconscious, or on a subconscious level, we'll just feel natural urges to do certain things. We'll think it's just our minds, but I believe a lot of it will come from the superconscious, right? So again, just a theory, but that's what I believe happens. And I believe this is alluded to in near-death experiences. And so when these energy nodes get very strong and they compel people, they compel the decisions that people are going to make. So if you're able to do that, then you're going to affect how reality manifests. So this affects manifestation for, you could say, depending on what scale we're talking about. So we can look at this on a scale of a local town or a state or a whole country or continent or the whole planet, right? So depending on how large you want to get, this will affect global manifestation. So in the last video, we talked about different parameters of manifestation, and we didn't go into it too much, but this is one of them. So when you talk about manifestation around a whole society or a whole country, you can make certain predictions about how do I want to word it? You can make certain predictions about the nature of that society. You can maybe take certain sociological parameters as it relates to crime and family values, things like that, education. But you can make certain predictions about a society based on what you might think of as these energy nodes, because these energy nodes are going to influence people's decisions and the choices they make, and that's going to affect what reality manifests for that whole society. And in other words, when that society makes choices, right? So any one person you can think of as making a choice, and that affects their local reality, how it manifests. But if you take the collection of everybody's choices, right, you can make certain predictions about what reality is going to manifest for that whole society. Because remember, when you make certain decisions, the reality that you manifest, so if you think of a whole society as traveling the possibility verse, they're going to manifest, or they're going to move toward a reality that has certain parameters, certain conditions that fit the frequency. One thing I don't know if I fully mentioned last video is that the reality you manifest is generally going to contain conditions that sustain the pattern of intentions that you held, right? Because if you think about traveling the possibility verse, right, according to your subconscious charge, if I charge, so I think last video I gave the hate example. Let's say I charge my subconscious at the hate frequency. Well, it's unlikely I'm going to manifest a reality that has all these sort of, in that reality, there are people and values in my life and opportunities that make it harder for me to hate, right? It's unlikely I would have manifested a reality like that if I'm traveling the possibility verse according to the hate frequency, and I'm sensing in the spirit certain realities that manifest my intention related to hating others, right? So it's unlikely. So in other words, the reality I manifest is generally going to contain things that sustain my hatred and allow it to grow more. I'm not going to manifest things that make that hatred harder. So I don't, like I said, I don't know if I mentioned that, but that you could think of that as a sustaining principle related to the law of manifestation. And so you'll get a similar thing with manifestation on a more global scale as it relates to superconscious. If you have certain energy nodes in a society, and those energy nodes affect people's decisions and make certain decisions more likely, then that society is going to manifest a particular reality, right? Where let's say you think of it as a state, right? Then there's going to be some reality where your state has certain conditions, certain parameters, certain services and people in that state and phenomena in that state that sustains the collective pattern of intention of that whole society, or the collective frequencies that society is charging, right? So that's a very macroscopic way of looking at it, but that I believe is what occurs, right? So this occurs metaphysically, and that's what a metaphysical energy node is. So to go to this next point, it says energy nodes can be positive or negative and influence how reality manifests globally. So I kind of already went to the manifest globally part. But what is very important is that negative or positive part, right? Because an energy node basically has stored within it a frequency. So we can have a set of frequencies, but for the moment, we'll just say a frequency. So if you have a negative energy node, very important, that is growing and growing and growing, and basically, well, we wouldn't call it an energy node unless it reached that point of sustenance, right? So you can think of it almost as a storm in the superconscious mind, right? When a group of people, or a large group of people, focus on a set of symbols and activities. These activities are incorporated too, which we'll talk a little more about that later. But if a large group of people are focused on a set of symbols and similar activities, then they can all add more energy to this localized region, And then that localized region starts to grow and grow, and it affects other people to engage in the same behaviors. And then those people add more energy, and it grows, and eventually becomes self-sustaining, and it becomes an energy node. Now, if a large group of people are focusing on these symbols and engaging in behaviors that are negative and are constantly charging at a negative frequency, then this energy node is going to be negative, and it's going to influence people to engage in negative behaviors and continuously charge at a negative frequency. And when they give in to those urges from the superconscious, then this energy node gains more energy. So that negative energy node gains more energy, and it causes people to engage in more negative behaviors or feel even stronger compulsion to engage in negative behaviors. And you can see it's going to act almost like a cancer on society, because it's going to keep growing and growing and growing. And as it grows more powerfully, it's going to exert an influence on people to so that they feel a stronger compulsion to behave more negatively. It's going to be harder to resist. And then when they give into that, then that energy node grows, and it's basically a cancer. So think of it as a metaphysical cancer on our society and on our planet, right? And so it's very bad to have a negative energy node that grows. You can think of it almost like metaphysical pollution, right? And that is sometimes how it's talked about in near-death experiences, right? Thought pollution. And you can have a positive energy node as well. So a positive energy node would compel people to behave more positively. And as people get into those positive urges or those positive compulsions, that positive energy node grows, and that's what you want on the planet, positive energy nodes. Now, basically based on what we've been talking about, you know kind of how I think of positive, right? So positive is not just a positive emotional frequency, right? Positive is really just refers to God, right? That's what positive really is. So it's spiritual energy. So if you have a spiritual energy node, that's actually going to cause a positive society to manifest, right? And that's really what we want. So you can imagine, right, if you had to guess, if you took a wild guess whether we have more negative energy nodes on a planet or more positive ones, you probably would guess we have more negative ones. In other words, you can probably imagine there are not a huge amount of positive energy nodes or energy nodes that cause us to charge spiritual energy behaving in the likeness of Jesus Christ. They're around, but I think the problem with the superconscious mind today is that there are many localized regions that consist of negative energy nodes. And so I'm going to give an example of one. So how can we talk about a negative energy node in practice? Because I talked about it in a very abstract way. So now I want to talk about it in a more practical way to kind of give you a sense of this is what an energy node looks like, and this is how you can kind of recognize one. Now, of course, you can't take a device and measure it, right? But you can get a sense based on what you see. So let's now go over this next point. So it says the adult entertainment industry likely has many negative energy nodes in the superconscious, right? So that's a very obvious one. So this has to do, like it says, with the adult entertainment industry. So that just consists of basically, that's like, adult websites, like OnlyFans and sexual content. You can even almost say in TV shows, and not to a lesser extent, but things like that, right? So you can imagine, so let's break that down. Well, how does that work, and how does that build a negative energy node? Well, the first thing I said is it's based on symbols that a group of people focus on. So what might you think of as symbols that cause a large group of people to focus on them? Well, first let's look at the frequency. What would be the frequency of this energy node? Well, it would be lust, right? So it would be a negative, because it's negative, which means it's not of God, right? You can have a positive frequency too, or something that seems positive but isn't of God in a different way. So we talked about that. But in this case, it's sinful in some way. So the negative frequency, well, that's a more complete definition. But I don't want to get too much into weeds on the definitions for the moment. For the moment, we'll just say that it consists of the frequency of lust, right? So now what might be so this basically energy node would cause people, when they focus on it, to charge at the frequency of lust. As they charge that feeling of lust, that adds more energy to this superconscious node. Excuse me. So what are the symbols that would allow this energy node to form that people are continuously focused on? Well, you can imagine it'll be adult websites, right? So it could be like, it'll be the actresses themselves. They act as subjects that large groups of people, millions of people focus on with these energy nodes. So I call them actresses. They're just prostitutes. But I say that to differentiate between street prostitutes. So these are prostitutes on a screen, right? So a large number of people focus on them. So they act as a memory in the superconscious, right? They carry a charge. And by the way, that's how some of them get famous, by the help of these energy nodes. You have the websites themselves, right? They consist of symbols, right, that people focus on. The name of the website, what are they called? The images of the website? I forget what they're called. The basically symbols that represent the website. And you have the activity themselves. So remember, the superconscious has subconscious paths, right? Subconscious paths. So we talked about this in chapter 13, but basically if you focus on the first subject in a path, you'll feel compulsion to engage in a behavior, right, in a linear way. So if I'm constantly engaging in the linear behavior of, I think of this website, and then I feel the next step, I feel a compulsion to engage in the next behavior associated with the next subject in the subconscious path or category in that path. So basically, if I follow the whole path, I might think of the website, go to my phone or go to a computer, pull up the website, look up this type of video, do what I gotta do, and then the subconscious path essentially ends. So that whole path basically charged a frequency of lust, right? And that's also stored in these superconscious memories. So if a lot of people do that, they basically add energy to the superconscious energy node. So when I focus on this website now, let's say I never even did it before. If millions of other people did it, I might focus on this website and feel an ambient urge, a relatively strong urge to now engage in the subconscious path they did. Go to the website, search a particular thing. I might even feel the need to search for things other people search for, right? To me, this is all just occurring subconsciously. I'm just thinking it's popping in my head randomly, but no, it is predetermined to some degree by the superconscious, or the superconscious will increase the probability down to my fetishes, right? So the fetishes I engage in could be influenced by the superconscious. The fetishes other people have will increase the likelihood that I have some fetish, or I feel this urge or this inspiration, this inspired thought to search for a particular thing, right? So you can kind of see how the adult entertainment industry, between the models or the prostitutes and the symbols of the website, the activity itself, right? If I'm constantly doing that activity in my home, right, then, or if a large number of people are doing the activity in their home, then I will feel more comfortable doing it in my home. I might not feel it from the superconscious as much if I'm outside, because other people don't do it while they're outside. If they do it when they're at home, then I'll feel it more when I'm at home, right? And that's basically how categories work. So you can see that all of these parameters and these components of the adult entertainment industry can cause a superconscious energy node to form. This one is more, there's more of a, how do I want to word it? Bias, if you will. We have more of a natural bias toward this energy node because of our physical body, right? Our physical body naturally causes us to charge at the sexual frequency, which makes us very primed for this energy node, right? And so when this energy node grows, it has a very negative impact on society, right? And as it grows more and more, it acts like a cancer, and it's going to cause, it's going to impact our decisions more and more and more as it grows more and more and more. It's going to grow more and more and more when we get into it more, and it's going to affect the realities that manifest for that particular society. Now you can imagine for that society and the decisions they're making, they're not going to manifest realities that make this energy node harder to sustain. Otherwise, how did they become attracted to it, at least by the principles we set up, right? So they're going to manifest a reality that makes this energy node easier to sustain, at least to sustain as it is, or for it to grow. So you can imagine a reality that has this energy node where people are constantly focusing on adult websites and constantly engaging in these behaviors, right? You know, the behavior went up by themselves. You can think of certain sociological conditions that make it easier for you to do that, right? In a reality where a large number of people are doing that, that society's probably not going to have, well, the main thing it's not going to have is God. God's presence is not going to be in that reality that much, right? Because that would make it way harder to sustain this energy node. You couldn't do it with a strong presence of God in that reality. So that's the most important thing, and that's what makes these negative energy nodes so bad, right? because that society is not going to have God's presence very strongly in it. We'll talk a little more about what that means later, but basically, the Holy Spirit is not going to be strongly directing everything in that society, right? Because people didn't ask for that. They're not wanting it. They're not manifesting that. And what you're charged is a form of consent for that to happen. But then you can also imagine a lot of the things that we see today, right? So as this energy node has grown in our society with OnlyFans and crap like that, what has happened? Men have become more lonely, right? Women have become more almost like drunk or intoxicated off of this sort of need to be beautiful and this need to be attractive. And they have this idea of like making money based on sexual content, right? So they sell out their values to make money off sexual content, and it makes them this is basically what I've observed, right? And like I said, I feel like I know these subconscious like the back of my hand. I can always look at a person and just tell what's going on in the subconscious level. And with a lot of women today, right, the way they live, dating man after man after man after man, waiting until like they're 40 or 50 to finally settle down, just having, not all women do this, but there's a growing culture within, I don't know what you call it, feminist society, within women's culture. There's a growing culture of women that engage in this, and it's becoming more acceptable, which is exactly what you would expect in a reality that sustains this node. In that reality, it's more culturally acceptable to do this, right? And so as this energy node grows, it impacts people's decisions, right, to make choices that may sustain this node. And that impacts, it basically impacts the beliefs of the culture, the outlook of the culture, what's more socially acceptable in the culture, and things like that, right? And so that's, like I said, that's exactly what you see. You see women just more promiscuous, right? They're far less interested in settling down. They have far less of a aversion, right, to kind of not sleeping around, right? It's just easier for them to do that now. They don't feel that same sort of inner urge that says, I shouldn't do that, it's wrong. Now, don't get me wrong, they still feel it. That's spiritual drive. But now there's a stronger compulsion to ignore it and act against it. That comes from this energy node, right? And that shapes our culture and our decisions. And so you see this energy node affects women, right? Like I said, with OnlyFans and all that crap and promiscuous dating life. And that culture, the culture that comes from that affects men as well. Men are more lonely. That loneliness causes them to focus on these energy nodes more, or I should say focus on adult websites more or rely on them more. And both of those behaviors just cause the energy node to grow even more, right? And so you see, I should also mention that in this reality that this energy node is attracting, you also have loneliness, you have depression, right? You have less interest in God, and so on and so forth, right? I could keep going into different sociological conditions that this reality is going to have in order to sustain this energy node, right? Another thing is basically if you just have more sexual impurity, right? These energy nodes also can contribute to SA, right? So assault of that particular kind. It can contribute more to trafficking, right? Because the energy node itself, you can imagine in that particular reality where people are more comfortable engaging in lust and impure sexual practices, in that reality, those things are more likely or more possible, right? That'll actually give you more content also for these websites. Men, right? So men, when they watch these things, they are more comfortable with sexual impurity. By the way, this node helps people to have gross fetishes, right? So fetishes are basically, there's a way of charging a sexual frequency from the mind, not necessarily the body. So you do have more this node will cause more gross fetishes. And people just are more desensitized to certain things. So you can imagine the reality that has this is going to have all of these sociological problems, right? And so this energy node affects the reality that manifests as a whole, right? And in that reality, there are all kinds of sociological problems that sustain the energy node, right? So this, like I said, this is how I see things, right? So I know that's kind of a lot to go through, but again, this is how I see reality, right? So, and I make predictions all the time, right? We're going to talk a little more about that later in the chapter. So, because I'll just look at certain conditions in society, I'll be like, okay, This, based on what I'm seeing, I can imagine many people's subconscious is charging this way. They're adding energy to the superconscious in this manner. When a large number of people are focusing on this, they're going to charge in this particular way, and that's going to affect that's going to cause a superconscious energy node to grow. And then I just imagine all of these sociological conditions that are just going to happen, right, as a result of doing that, right? Because when you're manifesting a particular reality, the sustaining component of reality is going to have all these sort of sociological conditions that help to sustain this energy node and allow it to grow more. Like I said, you can make predictions, and that's what I've been talking about this whole time, right? Another thing I forgot to mention, actually, let me go over this next point. It says negative entities work to strengthen the intensity of negative energy nodes. So I didn't mention it too much last video, but this is important. So in the last video, I talked about how there is a supernatural influence component to manifestation. So in other words, an external being can plant a suggestion, an external being can plant a suggestion in your subconscious, and that allows you to start to think and be inspired to do things or create things that go outside the scope of what you would have thought on your own, based on your own level of intelligence, right? Like we said, the default version of that is really just your psychic abilities, because that does kind of go outside of your level of intelligence. But even still, it can happen outside of that too. So the ideal way for it to happen is with the Holy Spirit. So you want the Holy Spirit to influence you and plant a suggestion in your subconscious that makes you feel inspired thought to do something. It's always going to be good, right? But it can happen with negative entities as well. So it can happen with demons. Now, demons have a stronger ability to plant a suggestion in your subconscious when you have a lower level of spiritual energy. That happens when you live in sin. So all of this is going to cause us to engage in sexual sin or lust, right? And the more we give into this negative energy node, which is full of a lust-based frequency, then we're going to, demonic entities will have an easier time planting suggestions in our subconscious. And then this also affects how reality manifests. So we talked about this in section on spiritual warfare, right? So negative entities, they know all of these rules, right? So if I'm correct, they would know all of these rules already. So they can engage in or orchestrate a spiritual attack on different scales. So we talked about how they can orchestrate a spiritual attack for a local community. It could just be one church, right? But it could be a whole community. It can be a whole town. It could be a whole state or a whole country, right? So they got nothing but time, right, to orchestrate and plan different types of attacks or spiritual attacks on society. So one of the things, their goal would be to establish these energy nodes, because again, negative energy nodes, if they form, then that's a place where God's presence is not strongly in, period. Because God's presence, anywhere you have a negative energy node, God's presence is not going to strongly be there. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a negative energy node, right? So they know they just need, it basically just takes one sin, right? They want to, if they can get in through lust, fine. They'll do that in the society, because the reality that forms is not going to have God's presence in it. That's going to allow every other sin to come in more easily. So that's why basically in our lives, they will try to get in through at least one sin. That's all they need to really get a foothold in our lives and also to damage society, right? So they would plant suggestions in our subconscious to sort of create a type of society or manifest a type of society. You can do it in an intelligent and sort of planned and organized way. It's not just randomly placing suggestions in people's subconscious so they engage in lust. I mean, there are demons that do that, don't get me wrong. That is done. But you can also do it in a more intelligent way. And we talked about how the fallen angels, which are the high-ranking demons, they do it in a more intelligent way. So I'm sure we all have a demon that's in our life trying to get us to do lust-based things and just engage in certain behaviors. So when we have certain opportunities that they think is ideal or opportunistic, right? Just like bacteria, right? That they think is opportunistic, they'll plant a suggestion and hope we give in, and if we do, we add more energy to the superconscious, right? And I should also mention before I go forward that according to this theory, this also shows us that when we watch all those adult titles and all that crap, right, we add negative energy to the superconscious, and that impacts others, right? So that's kind of what I was saying before about how we're all entangled, right? So entanglement, I forget what this term, spooky action at a distance, I think it's referring to that, but Like basically says if I touch something here, or if I measure something here, that's going to limit what I'm able to measure over here, right? That's entanglement. And you get the same thing here, right? If I watch an adult title here, that's going to affect someone over here in terms of with how reality manifests for them. And so that's important. So this idea of like, oh, I'm not hurting anyone, it's just me, nonsense. That's not how reality works. We can't just do the atheist thing and pretend because we pretend this thing that we're being told about doesn't really happen. We can just go on pretending reality doesn't work that way. That's just living by your random imagination. No, right? These are metaphysical laws. Right, again, this is a theory. You could test this theory too, and I could be wrong, but I believe I'm correct, right? You could test these theories and using certain semi-empirical methods, right? We talked about semi-empiricism in chapter 2, but again, these ideas are referred to in referred to in near-death experiences as well. So if they're correct, then no, you can't. There is no such thing as sort of doing this or engaging in sinful behaviors and it doesn't affect anyone. No, it always affects somebody. It affects everybody, right? And so it's your negative behavior or your sin is never just localized to you in how it affects you. It always affects everyone. And that's why we're all responsible for each other to some degree. Any sin I engage in is going to add energy to the negative energy to the superconscious, is going to help to cause some negative reality to manifest, and I'll be partially responsible for that. So that isn't good, and that's basically what they say in near-death experiences all the time, right? So when you serve God, right, and you want to manifest His will, then now you're helping people, right? You're helping the best reality to manifest, and there's other people who you won't even know about, right? Who are going to benefit from your choices. So it works both ways. But, just wanted to get that out of the way, but going back to the concept of negative entities, when the high-ranking demons, when they sort of have a plan and they want to cause it to manifest, they will usually deal with the most powerful people in society. So they don't usually deal with like the regular people like us, right, or like me and other people, the commoners, right? They're going to deal with the highest people in society. This is why you see the most corruption with the highest people in society. In Hollywood, with the rich people, with government, you will see the most corruption there because that's where the high-ranking demons are putting all of their efforts into, right? They're placing most of the resources there because that's going to have a huge impact on the majority of society. So you can imagine the demons, these high-ranking demons or the fallen angels, they're going to be the ones to plant suggestion in executives and people with lots of money to cause them to they'll feel an inspired thought to open some adult entertainment industry, right? We've seen something similar with Kanye West, right? I don't know if he actually did it. I don't think he actually did it, but he wanted to open like a I'm not able to say the word here, but an adult entertainment studio, I guess, right? Those are the type of suggestions they plant in powerful people because that's going to create an energy node. That's going to add more energy to this negative energy node. That's going to prevent God's spirit from entering into that society even more. It's going to cause people to become more lustful and engage in these negative behaviors, and that just keeps them around, right? A society that doesn't have God's spirit working in it that much is like playground for demonic entities, right? So they have more power in the society, and they're able to control how society manifests more, right? So they're just more in control, and that's what they want. So they're going to plant those suggestions, like I said, in powerful people to open some adult entertainment studio. And this is where I believe OnlyFans came from. This is where people have these certain ideas about OnlyFans. Because OnlyFans, I don't even know what makes it so different. It's no different than any other sort of adult website. But I guess what makes it different is they're like, oh, well, it's not just adult and adult. Please, I don't even know why it's legal to have them both in the same thing. It's nonsense. Of course, you can have a kind of predatory marketing strategy that makes it seem like it's something different, but all that's going to do is make it more acceptable in the culture. If in your mind you say, oh, this is a website where people cook and a website where people engage in adult entertainment, right? So if they're not separated in your mind, they're going to start to blend, right? And now the thing that's taboo is now becoming more accepted with the thing that's not taboo, that's culturally accepted. So that's, like I said, it's kind of a mind control technique. Oh, actually, I didn't mention it yet. I'm going to talk about that a little later in the video. But it's almost like a mind control technique or a subliminal messaging technique. You don't want that, right? So if you're controlling a society, if you don't want this, right? You're not going to have industries that are allowed to mix these different contexts because you're going to kind of brainwash people, right? If you put this negative thing, if this negative thing is always purely negative, I focus on that charge's negative frequency based on what it's doing, then that negative feeling would make me say no, and I'm going to move away from it. But if you can mix this negative thing with something that's acceptable, I might focus on this acceptable thing and then in a process also think about this negative thing, but now I have this acceptable energy. So guess what? This thing feels more acceptable now. That's a brainwashing technique. And that's what OnlyFans is. And so that's how I guess it became more culturally acceptable, right? So some guy, right, I don't know who really created it, but imagine some guy, so we talked about this in the last video, they were trying to manifest, so they kept thinking, how can I do this? How can I make more money or something, right? That idea came to their mind, could have been planted in their subconscious by a demon, right? And then they're manifesting it, and it has a parasitic effect because it's a negative manifestation. So we talked about how that works. It's a negative manifestation. It's not aligned with the will of God. It's parasitic on reality. It helps to sustain this negative energy node. And overall, it just causes reality to manifest globally in a more negative way. And you can make predictions about society or sociological conditions as a result of these metaphysical principles. So, like I said, I know there's a lot, but that's how I tend to think about these things. You know? And so to go into another example of a negative energy node has to do with the economy. So to go over this point, it says the economy also contains superconscious energy nodes sustained by greed and avarice. So the same principle, right? So if I want to manifest a reality where I have all this money and all these riches, right, and all this sort of wealth, well, there's a way of doing that in a more positive way that's aligned with God's Spirit. Then there's a way of doing that in a selfish way that isn't aligned with God's Spirit, right? So if I do it in a way that isn't aligned with God's Spirit, I'm going to manifest some reality, and that reality will have conditions, right, that basically aren't aligned with God's will. So what conditions can you imagine are going to be in some reality where I'm rich as a result of the frequency of greed and avarice? Well, if I have all this money in that reality, probably other people aren't going to have a lot, right? Because I have everything, right? Now, if I manifest according to the will of God, it would be more even and more nice and things like that. But no, this is selfish, right? I manifested reality that only focused on me. So that reality kind of is set up in a way where I'm the main focus in a certain way, right? As it relates to money and economics and things like that. So if I have all this money in this reality based on greed and selfishness, you can imagine a lot of other people don't have a lot of resources. I have a lot of power in this reality because that would be a reality that sustains my wealth and sustains my greed. You can imagine that in this reality, I'm going to, how do I want to word it? In this reality, I'm going to not be satisfied. So that's actually very important. I didn't really talk about that with the lust-based thing too, because that's also a component there. So we talked about how with negative pleasures, right? So in chapter 3, I edited it in because I didn't mention it speaking, but negative pleasures are basically insatiable, right? There's no way to ever truly be satisfied from the negative pleasures, right? From the pleasure you get from some action that's not aligned with God. Because as soon as you engage in negative pleasure, your spiritual energy drops, right? So your spiritual energy drops, the void increases. So we talked about how the void is a kind of emptiness you feel that's related to your connection with God. The only way to close that void is to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. There's no other way, right? So until you do, you can draw nearer and nearer and nearer to Jesus or nearer to God, and then the void gets closed more and more and more, but it'll never be fully closed until you have a relationship with Jesus, right? And the further you go away from Jesus, or the further you go into darkness, the void increases. Negative pleasures are kind of like an illusion. They might make it seem like you're experiencing some type of joy and happiness, but you're going to notice the void always increases when you engage in it, right? So even though you felt good. And so because the more you engage in negative pleasures, the more the void is going to increase, your connection to God decreases, and now you feel more empty. So then when you stop the negative pleasure for a little while, the spiritual energy increases, and if you engage in it again, it just goes lower again. And so it's never going to go past a certain point, right, until you have a relationship with God. Now, so in these realities, what's going to help to sustain these realities is the fact that you're never going to be satisfied, right? You're never going to, negative pleasures never leave you truly satisfied. You can be temporarily, you can have temporary satisfaction or a temporary pleasure, and that pleasure could seem satisfying at first, but in the long run, it's never going to be satisfying. You're always going to feel empty at some point. And then you're going to need more. You're going to want more. You're going to be searching for something to make you feel better. And what these nodes generally will do is they will cause you to try to rely more on this negative pleasure in some way. You need more, right? So when people engage in lust, for example, they get desensitized to it after a while, right? And that has to do with negative memory. Now, by the way, you don't, because I used to do this, right? Negative memory doesn't have to get in the way, right? If you just know how to charge, then you can just charge endlessly, right? But if you don't know how to charge, negative memory is going to get in the way a lot. And when that negative memory gets in the way, you need more of a shock. You need a way of shocking yourself against that negative memory so you can still feel energy again from this negative pleasure. So that's why when people get into adult entertainment and lust, when they go into it for a long time, a lot of times they just they'll either just sit with the more dulled feeling of pleasure that they get from this, so it still feels bad, they still feel guilty, and they don't even get much pleasure from it anymore, but they still feel like they need to do it, and that has to do with temptation and things like that. But if they want to try to get more pleasure, they need more of a shock, right? They need to do something that looks new compared to all this. And so they get into more gross fetishes because they need it to keep looking more and more new to their subconscious. And the more new it looks to the subconscious, the more of a shock they get, and then they shock charge it. So I believe the same thing happens with greedy people, right? Or rich people who have all this wealth. Right? Because it's like, if you think about it, so many of them, like, they have so much money. Why do they need more all the time? Right? And it's because of this, because that money only allowed them to be happy for a very short time. And then now they feel empty because they don't have God. Money means nothing, right, in the spirit realm. And I think I mentioned it before. All these spirits know it, the spirits know it, the demons know it, angels know it, the demons know it, everyone knows that in the spirit realm. It's no secret. Money is nothing in the spirit realm. It means absolutely, it's just some, like I said, it's just some nonsense humans created to make it easier to trade. But us, because we live inside this illusion, we think money actually means something. So many people have so much faith, not in God, but they have faith in money. They think money is the secret to happiness, right? They have faith that one day they will find true happiness through money, right? And when people get rich, and they get all this money, they might feel happy for a short time, but then they feel empty. There's the void again. The void is not closed by anything except Jesus Christ. And so when they realize they're not very happy, and they start to feel empty, what do they need? They need more of a shock, right? They've developed so much negative memory to all these luxuries of being rich, right? So traveling and having all these women and all these cars and jewelry and even fame in some cases, they get desensitized to it after a while because of negative memory. And so they need more of a shock to the system to feel more of that pleasure they once did. Right? And even if they were managed to do that, they would just feel more negative. They would feel less spiritual energy. So if they could continuously feel negative pleasure, they would feel the void would increase still. So there's no way to be satisfied by negative pleasures. They're insatiable. You will never feel satisfied with them. So greedy people, they want to try to get more pleasure out of their resources, so they engage in more shock value. So they need more money, more profits, right? And also they act out of fear, right? So I don't know what the terms in economics are. I'm not into economics, but I imagine they have certain operating costs, right? So they're spending a certain amount to sustain their business, and they want a certain amount to grow their business as well. But then they also want to have just a certain amount of a cushion, right? A cushion to say, I have this much money, I could do anything with it. And that's not related to my profits or my company or sustaining my company and things like that. So if they feel their spending, right, is going at a certain rate and the profits they're making to have a certain cushion, if they're not, it can happen in a way where they're not comfortable. So they want to make more profits so they have a larger cushion and they don't have to worry about their spending costs sort of growing to the point where their cushion starts to shrink. They have to tap into it. So that's acting out of fear. You get like a kind of high of knowing you have all this money because it makes you feel more comfortable, right? So this is a form of, that in its own way is a negative pleasure. A negative pleasure deriving from the comfort that money sort of brings us. Again, it's just an illusion. But that comfortability of apparent abundance, I don't think it's actually abundance. We'll talk a little more about these ideas when I get to the law of happiness, which we'll talk about later. So I'm touching into those ideas a little bit, but suffice it to say, when a person acts out of that fear, right, they can try to manifest reality based on greed, where they have all these resources. But in that reality, like I said, they're never happy, and they keep acting in ways that allow them to get more money and more money and more money and more money, and it's insatiable. They're never happy. And so what ends up happening is they take more and more and more and more resources from everyone else. They'll engage in behaviors that destroy the planet simply for profit, right? And they'll reach a point where you can't sort of get more profit and help society at the same time, right? That's why it's sinful, right? Because you won't have the qualities of God in this society in a more prevalent way while you're getting more profit. At some point, you're going to have to choose profit or helping society. You can't have both, right? And so when you behave in sin, right, you're just going to engage in behaviors that get you more profit at the cost of society, and it destroys society, right? So you can imagine there are many, many negative energy nodes related to greed, right, in the business sector, right? And this has to do with different corporations, things like that. Now you might say, yeah, but these aren't necessarily symbols that huge amounts of people are focusing on, and that's actually true. But here's the difference here. This is how I think of it, right? So I always have the ability to manifest as much money as I want to, right? But if I'm not manifesting the will of God, so we talked about manifestational hierarchy, if I'm not manifesting the will of God, then my power of my manifestation is just going to go up against someone else's. And the one who charged more energy is the one who's going to win in terms of manifestation, right? So if a huge amount of people are trying to manifest money, then everyone's manifestation is going to be fighting each other, right? But that's actually not what happens in society. This is like I said, this is how I see things, right? Most of us are so focused on so many different things, from working. Some of us got like 2 jobs. We have entertainment, so we're always focusing. We're always on our phones, looking up things, trying to have fun or entertain ourselves, things like that. Or we're just focused on, we're watching TV, which I guess is also entertainment. We're going out sometimes, things like that, right? And so we're not manifesting much, right? So we talked about normal manifestation, which is virtually not manifestation at all. But what are the executives in these companies doing? They don't have to worry about 2 or 3 jobs or bills or trying to plan the future, putting all their effort into planning their future and changing it, at least for themselves the way we would, and things like that. They're comfortable. They can use all of their manifestational energy, which we talked about before, so they can use their subconscious charge to just focus on more profits. Now, if that charge or that manifestational charge was going up against everyone else's, then sure, theirs would be pushed back because there's no way it can stand up to everyone else's charge. But everyone else isn't charging for that purpose. So you only have a relatively small group of people in society using their subconscious to manifest wealth. Since no one else is doing it, right, reality just kind of bends toward what they're manifesting, right? If more people would do it, then you would notice their manifestations get weaker and wouldn't be as effective. But since there's only a few people at the top, now because of the way society is set up, their choices are very consequential for the whole economy. So if they're constantly manifesting wealth, then the entire the reality is going to start manifesting in a way that has an economy that bends to their will. And that's what happens. So you can have it's a smaller energy node than this adult entertainment kind, but it is still an energy node where the richest people in society have a pattern of intention, and they focus on, in this case, they just focus on things like profit and, things I guess you could associate with wealth, but in particular, certain businesses will constantly, like the pharmaceutical industry, they'll constantly focus on certain business models to obtain more wealth, and they're constantly using their manifestational power. So this is a real supernatural power. It doesn't matter if you use it for something bad. You're going to tap into your supernatural power that God gave you, right? God gave you this sort of, I like to think of it as God basically took his power and gave us a tiny, 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 almost insignificant little speck of his power. And we're free to use it for whatever we want to, right? What he's looking for is us to use it to reconnect back to him, which is kind of like the whole idea. But we can use that power to get more money, we can get more wealth, we can get women, we can get cars, we can use that power for everyone to, if we know how to truly use it. And one of the true ways to use it is through manifestation. So these people use that charge to figure out how to get more money and squeeze more money out of society. So they're going to get all these creative ideas. They're using their psychic abilities. They're going to tap into future realities where they did finally get more money or get more profits, and they're going to put that into a plan, and they're going to manifest, right? It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't matter how negative it is. They're going to find ways to get more and more and more and more and more and more profit, because that represents the power God gave them. God gave them a speck of his power to do things like that, right? So there's always a way, right? And they will find it. And so as you have more people in these different industries doing this, we have the military industry, the pharmaceutical industry. What's the other one? Hedge funds or something like that. Which I'm not really into that stuff. I don't know exactly what they do, but you have people into real estate, buying houses, and things like this, right? The restaurant industry, which causes huge problems because of the amount of food they have serving others. That also damages the planet, but they need more profits, right? So you have energy nodes related to all these industries, and there's symbols related to all of them, and behaviors or subconscious paths in these energy nodes related to all of them. And this energy node grows, and it acts also as a cancer on our planet, right? So that was just an example. Those are some examples of energy nodes. Like I said, I could go on and on and on, but this is kind of how I see things, right? And like I said, just to make it clear one more time, the energy nodes, the realities manifested by these guys, or the guys at the top of society, and those realities, there's going to be a lot of people who don't have money, a lot of people who are desperate, and that's why they will buy the products that these greedy businessmen have, right? No matter how desperate they are, they're still going to buy their products. And there's going to be other conditions in that reality, sociological conditions you can imagine will help to sustain these energy nodes. So that's how it works. So another one, so now I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and start talking about how some of these principles apply to the occult. One of the main ways, which I'm going to get into in a moment, has to do with the entertainment industry. So we didn't talk about it too much here, but the entertainment industry is also consists of negative energy nodes, right? So that just has to do with music, right? Movies, TV, all that stuff can consist of symbols, which is usually going to be the actors, the musicians, people who are famous, things like that. This is why demons love them so much, right? Because lots of people focus on them. So though they act as symbols in the superconscious, and you can use them to sort of influence people's behavior, right? So you can have a negative energy node like that. Let's say all of these celebrities and things like that channel demons and engage in witchcraft, which is kind of what happens, right? But if that happens, you can imagine that these people are going to, as many people focus, well, I'm going to get into that in a moment, but as many people focus on them, right, it can cause these people to engage in behaviors that are not aligned with the spirit of God. Right, so that is something I believe is highly done in the occult, and we're going to talk about these ideas as it relates to the occult more, a little more for the rest of the video. So, and I could have split it into two videos, but again, sometimes I just want to get it out the way. I may split it later, right, just divide the video into two because it's a little easier for people watching, but I just figured I'll put it in the whole video. So to go over this point, it says, an occult technique for mind control or subliminal messaging involves planting negative suggestions in symbols in the superconscious. That's what I meant to write. So that's important because this is something a lot of people, if my theory is right, this is something I would say a lot of people don't know about. And so how would this work? Well, there's two different ways, right? Actually, no, I'll talk about it here. Let me see. Just trying to remember how I set things up. Well, I could put it here. I'll just kind of go over it. So in the superconscious, right, you can put a lot of energy into, actually, no, there's something else, sorry. So I'm trying to remember exactly the order I wanted to mention it, but there's something else I wanted to mention. So you can put sort of in your intention or store energy in a symbol in the superconscious, but you can do it in a way that's not obvious to the conscious mind. So that's very important. That's why, if you know how to do that, you can get a type of subliminal messaging in society. And so how does that work? Well, the way it's basically goes back to the nature of your spirit. So we talked about how your spirit, or sensing in the spirit, or your your psychic abilities that occur at a normal level, right? So not transcendental, that's illegal. God doesn't want us to do that. But the ones that occur at a normal level. Your spirit can sense and pick up on things that go far beyond what your physical body is able to sense. And when you sense those things, you're normally going to get a sense of it. It'll be very weak a lot of times, but you'll get a sense of it at the level of intuition, right? Now, the more you have a relationship with God, Jesus Christ, and Holy Spirit, you're going to be more sensitive to positive things going on in the spirit realm. Angels, the Holy Spirit, positive changes in the timelines, things like that. And you're also going to be more sensitive to the negative things because you'll have a larger shock to them, right? But yeah, so your spirit can sense things far beyond your physical body. And what it also can sense, and this is very important, it can sense intentions, right? So it can actually, so that's kind of just what mind reading is. But more specifically in this case, it can sense intentions that you stored or associated with a particular symbol or an activity. So that's very important. I actually believe that can happen. So how might that work? So let's say that I make a song, right? Let's say I'm making a song. Let's say I talk about, having a fun day outside, right? That's my song. But my intention behind writing that song, let's say I have a different kind of meaning behind it. And the song itself may sound light and happy, but my intention is actually dark and negative, right? I want to go, maybe it's not as far as dark and negative, but Semi Charms Life by Third Eye Blind. So I know how I'm really old, so some people might not have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's like a song that came out, I think in the 90s, where I think the song sounds very upbeat and happy, but I think they're talking about very dark stuff. If my memory serves me, that's where I remember hearing about the song many years ago. But suffice it to say, that's an example of what I'm talking about. So if I make a song that the organizational pattern is very light and happy, so when you hear it, so we talked about subconscious forms in chapter 7 and chapter 13 of book 1. It has an organizational pattern that has a subconscious form that looks more happy and of a positive frequency. Then when I focus on it, I'll be inspired to feel happiness and a positive frequency. However, I can also sense the intention that a person had when they made the song. So that happens too, which we didn't talk about that, of course, in the first book 1 because we weren't talking about anything metaphysical then. But I believe your subconscious can also sense that. For example, when I make this song, that song consists of symbols or subconscious path in the superconscious, right? So now I focused on it, right? So the subconscious path, I focused on it and I really charged it because I kept focusing on it as I was creating the song and things like that. So that's a memory in the superconscious. And that memory holds on to what I was thinking about when I was creating it. So it even will store my intention, my thoughts, my feelings in that superconscious memory. So it's actually in there in that superconscious, and when a person focuses on that song later that I created, which is a symbol or subject in the superconscious, they will feel the same thing I felt, or they'll have a ambient urge to think or feel the same things I felt when I was focusing on a song. Now, because I created it, right, it's very easy for me to store my intentions in that song almost before anyone else gets to it, right? And I know I can create a song that, in a sense, might look like a category. So if it looks similar to another song, a person might have an increased ability to think in a certain way based on the other song. But when it comes to sensing in the spirit, like I said, the spirit is very sensitive. So your spirit can actually sense even the intention I put in the song. Now, if my spirit is sensing something, and it's possible for my spirit to sense something, and for my conscious mind to have no idea, right? Because my conscious mind is just thinking or looking at the arrangement pattern, right? And that inspires the intention I produce and things like that. But in my spirit, I can be sensing something my conscious mind is not aware of, right? And that occurs at the subconscious level. Now, when you sense something in the spirit, that'll act as a suggestion to your subconscious. So we talked about that in chapter 7 as well. So normally when you let's say you're sleeping, and I mentioned this before, and you hear the TV on, your physical body is sensing the TV. Now it's much more dulled, but your senses aren't completely turned off. So when you hear something on the TV while you're sleeping, you might dream something related to what you're sensing. So what you sense acts as a suggestion to your subconscious mind, which just acts on instinct. The same thing happens when you sense something in the spirit. So when you sense in the spirit, your subconscious will start to think and behave in a way out of instinct based on what you sensed. So it acts as a suggestion. A demon could come right next to you and whisper in your ear. Now you don't know because it's happening in the spirit realm. A demon could come right next to you, whisper in your ear to get angry or attack that person. You're not physically hearing it, but you hear in the spirit, right? It acts as a suggestion to your subconscious. To you, you might feel like a negative presence around. Normally, if a demon is doing stuff like that, your energy is already so tuned into demonic entities or negative frequencies that you wouldn't notice. It wouldn't be a shock to you. You would just think it's normal. Sometimes you may notice a heavier feeling or heavier negative presence, but a lot of times you're so desensitized to it, you just don't notice it. You'll notice positive feelings like that because it'll be like a shock to you. That'll be like your angel trying to get your attention and things like that. But yeah, so a demon could do that. It'll act as a suggestion to your subconscious, and then you might randomly, to you, it'll just be a random urge to do something negative or to yell at someone. You might just get an inspired thought to do that because in the spirit, you're sensing something that acts as a suggestion to your subconscious, and at the level of instinct, you just had the feeling of getting more angry. So that's how it works. And the same principle can happen with music, movies, songs, any symbol, right? If I can put negative energy in a symbol, right? Especially if I get allotted to that symbol, when someone focuses on it, their spirit's gonna sense that negative energy, even if their mind has no idea. That's gonna act as a suggestion to the subconscious, and they'll feel an urge to do something based on the energy I put in that symbol. So this is a mind control technique or a form of subliminal messaging. Right? So I believe this happens all the time with music and movies and things like that. You can put a lot of negative energy into these symbols to influence people. And actually, and I'm going to go over this point. So this is an example of it. So it says backmasking is an occult technique for storing negative frequencies in music played backwards. So this is something I don't know is done much today, but this is something that became an issue in, I think it was 1980s during a time called Satanic Panic or something like that, which during that time was kind of like a rise in sort of satanic activities, right? So by today's standards, it's like it would almost be no big deal, right? But around those days, people were more shocked, right? There was more shock value to all this negative, evil things, right? And like I said, right, if you're manifesting a reality that doesn't have God's presence in it, a sociological condition that would be aligned with that reality, or you would expect in that reality, would be more desensitization, right, to evil and demonic things, which is exactly what we see today. It almost seems like, at least according to this theory, right, it seems like our reality manifested the sociological conditions that would make it possible for these energy nodes to grow and become more sustained, or negative ones. So I just wanted to mention that in those days, reality or the society had conditions where we can still be shocked by satanic stuff. So it would have had the negative energy nodes wouldn't have been as strong at that time, right? But to go back to this, so during that time, there were they noticed that certain songs were being played backwards, or they would have certain sections in the song that was played backwards. And when they would listen to it or try to play it forward, it would say something very dark, or it would sound very hidden sometimes, or scary, or just very dark. It would just be completely satanic, right? And so they were obviously, many Christians were very uncomfortable with that, obviously, right? And they didn't fully know how. They didn't understand. It was clear that something was happening. No, it's too hard to get something coherent to play backwards. So it was clear that the people doing this, they were doing it for a reason, but Christians didn't know why. But because it seemed so dark, and sometimes there were very direct satanic things said, it seems like a spiritual attack, which of course it was, right? And so what I wanted to explain here is how that works. So when you play a song backwards, right, the intention you're putting into the song is still with the song. It doesn't matter whether you play it backwards, frontwards, right side up, upside down, side to side. Like, it makes no difference, right? Your spirit can sense all of it, or it can still sense the intention underlying it. The playing it backwards might make it incoherent to the conscious mind, but again, you have different levels of awareness, right? But more specifically, in this case, you have the ability to sense in the spirit, and it makes no difference what direction or what orientation, right, it's being presented to you in for the spirit. That's how strong these spirit senses are. And so if you put satanic energy or negative energy in a song, right, and play it backwards, during that backwards part, the person's not going to notice what's happening if they're just listening to the song, right? Now, your spirit's going to sense that negative intention, then that acts as a subliminal message, right? You're going to feel an urge at that moment of the song to do something that represents the energy stored or the intention stored in that part of the song. So as an example, I think it was Led Zeppelin from making it. I'm trying to think. There were a couple examples that I remembered. One of them, it might have been Led Zeppelin. So one of them just said something directly about Satan, that piece of crap, right? So I curse him out all the time. Not all the time, but like I don't think about him. But I do curse him out when his name comes up. Right, but that piece of garbage, right? So yeah, there was a portion of the song, I think it was that song, I think it was Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven, something like that. I remember reading it. And now why would that be in this song, right? Because when someone's playing it forward and they don't have no idea what it's saying, the intention is stored in that song. And you can just store a subliminal message that way. And the person's spirit's still going to sense it. It's going to act as a suggestion to the subconscious. On the subconscious level, they might just feel a natural urge to be more interested in evil, right? It's like they just feel more, evil seems more acceptable to them now for some reason, right? They won't have the same aversion to it they had before, right? Now, if you have the spirit of Jesus Christ and you're more connected to Jesus, you have a huge aversion to evil, right? But, if you keep hearing these things that keep having these suggestions from negative suggestions, they're pretty much always against Jesus, right? When they mention, they're always against God and Jesus Christ. And I should mention when you do it, before I get into it, I'll just kind of finish the thought. So in that case, when you hear that song, so in Stairway to Heaven, and you have that back masked part, right? You would feel a natural urge. You'll just feel an ambient urge to be more comfortable with evil. And if you can bombard a society with these media that contain these hidden sort of intentions, just keep, like radiation, right? So just keep bombarding people with this type of metaphysical radiation almost. Their spirit's going to keep sensing things over and over and over, and it's going to keep acting as a suggestion. And over time, that society will just become more comfortable with evil. Now, this is very subliminal, right? They're still charging positive intentions. They're still focusing on negative things. But that shock value is kind of moving away because their spirit is just getting a little more comfortable with it. They're not as shocked by it anymore, right? When you charge spiritual energy, it's very hard to sin. It's such a shock to you, right? You don't want anything to do with the sin. You would rather just suffer than engage in sin because you're on a subconscious level, you're connecting more to God, and now you feel an urge to behave more like Jesus, right? But when you don't have spiritual energy and your spirit's constantly sensing these negative things, right? And they're planting suggestions in your subconscious that just make you more comfortable and not as shocked to evil. And you're charging positive frequencies here and there. But because that shock isn't there, sooner or later you're going to be, this evil thing's not so bad, right? And you'll do it. And it's going to happen more and more and more. And when you have these other energy nodes in your society, just keeping the pressure on your subconscious, like a mood, right? Then sooner or later you're going to be more likely to make a choice in this way, and then it just keeps going on and on, right? Until eventually that society changes and people make decisions to start to manifest these future negative realities. And people in their mind, they're just all still working hard on these positive things, but there's just a desensitization to the Spirit of God that probably wasn't available 50 years ago. But these things are hard to measure, right? There's no metaphysical theory where you could just ask people these things, right? And so this is what happens with subjectively verifiable phenomena, right? So this is what I believe happens, right? And what I was going to say before is getting an intention in a song is a tricky part too, because so we talked about how your subconscious charges more if you get your intention more pure, right? So we talked about that in chapter 12 of book 1, so you can review that, if you're confused by that. But if you get your attention more pure, your subconscious will charge more powerfully. So we talked about a level 2 charge. So it's the same things here, right? You want to get your intention in a song in a very pure way. Now, if you're making a song, if you're making a song and you're constantly thinking about what to say, and I want this to sound cool and things like that, all those tensions are going to go into the song, but they're going to kind of make the evil component of the intention less pure, right? And so that's part of the occult techniques. Occult techniques work to try to get around that limitation. How can I get a pure intention of evil in the song while also creating it as well? Because it's hard for me to create it and make it sound good and like something people will like, and also get a very pure intention of evil at the same time. This is just one of the limits of metaphysics. So there are different ways around it, right? So one of them is backmasking. So like I said, if you have to go out of your way to make a song that's saying something dark backwards, it's going to take a lot of your intention to do that, right? And so even if you're making it sound good, like played frontwards, your intention, that dark intention, is going to be filled up in the song because all your thoughts were all your thoughts were based on creating something that could be played backwards and say this. So that intention is going to sort of be like an underlying, almost like a master intention that guided the creation of the song. So it's going to be all over the song if you do that. That's why they use backmasking. By the way, I should mention that Aleister Crowley, who was this piece of crap Satanist, right? And like I said before, some people say he wasn't Satanist, he was, whatever term you want to use to call the demons he worshipped, right? He also said backmasking. He basically, I forget exactly what he said, but he basically said backmasking, he encouraged it. He said something to the effect by it's good to get, I don't remember. It was something about backmasking is good to think in a backwards way by external influence. And what I think he was saying by that was it's helpful to have an external influence. So we talked about how a supernatural influence is a component of manifestation. He's talking about a demon helping you to write a song so that there's a hidden message when it's played backwards. Because it's kind of hard for us to do. And I think he was around a time where the tools to do that weren't necessarily mainstream. So a demon would have helped him do that, and that would have been easy. Now your connection to a demon has to be extraordinary, right? Extraordinarily high to have that type of connection and communication where a demon it would be nothing for a demon. But for them to help you to do that, you'd have to have a very strong connection to the demon, which Aleister Crowley had. That's why he was such a piece of garbage, right? So he was like a high priest, I don't know what they would call it, witch or into witchcraft, something like that, high magician. But yeah, so he encouraged backmasking as a cult technique because, he understands cult techniques as well. He got them from demons, right? But this is how it works. So that, like I said, one of the ways around being able to put a very pure intention in a song is just play it backwards. You can also kind of talk about a song in an almost derisive way, right? So, which is what I mentioned, right? You can talk about a song that sounds kind of lighthearted forward, but if you're mocking it, then you could talk about it the whole song, but that intention underlying the song, if it's mocking, is very easy to keep it pure, which is why he mentioned the song Highway to Heaven, right? He used a song about heaven, but really he's talking about Satan, right? And it's very easy to keep a very pure, dark intention in a song like that, because you can say it in a way that sounds like happy, but you're just mocking the whole time. It's very hard for me to sort of have an intention based on, let's even say it's not love, right? Let's just say I'm talking about having fun and partying, right? It's hard to think about that and talk about Highway to Heaven and get that sort of negative energy in there. So it's easier if I just talk about something that I'm mocking all day. Now I can focus on heaven and having this mocking energy and still make it sound good while my intention is negative. So you see that in a lot of song, even today, right? You see the kind of songs that mock. And so like I said, it's always Jesus, right? They mock Jesus and they mock heaven and they mock God. That's what they're doing. They're trying to get that negative energy in there, right? And so they can get it very pure. Now, when you listen to these songs on the radio, right? I think Judas with Lady Gaga was another one. When you hear these songs on the radio, it might sound happy and pop and things like that. But in the spirit, you're sensing the mocking of God because that was the intention that went into that song, right? And so when you sense it, you feel it's like a subliminal suggestion. Now your subconscious reacts. It just does things out of instinct. It doesn't really have much of a rational mind on its own. So it's going to react to that, what your spirit is sensing, by having an inner urge to not really think of God or Jesus in a reverent way, or you're going to feel more comfortable mocking them, and you're going to feel more comfortable, right, with just thinking of God like, You know what I mean? And that's what these songs do. They're like sociological radiation. Well, I should say they're like metaphysical radiation, and they have this sociological impact. So this is done in the occult. They know how it works, so they do this all the time. And it's very easy to do this when people don't know metaphysics. Like I said, you can imagine for me, this is how I see society. So I see stuff like this all the time. I can just pinpoint very easily something that I feel like, I don't know for sure, but I can pinpoint very easily things that looks like an occult mind control technique or a subliminal messaging technique, because that's exactly what I would do, right, if I were trying to separate people from God or Jesus Christ. Before I go forward, I should mention that one of the worst offenders of this backmasking technique was Jay-Z. So he also puts this kind of derisive sort of, these derisive statements in songs, like, what's the song, Empire State of Mind, which it sucks because most of the song is a good song, right? But he said, Jesus, like one part of the song says, Jesus can't save you. And then another part, life begins when the church ends. Things like that, right? I don't know if they're back to back, but I remember those two parts of the song, right? So this is the mocking energy, right? That intention gets stored in the song. Now, they're just like two parts of the song. There may be more parts of the song that are like that, but most of the song isn't really talking about that, right? So you might not even think about it that much, but your spirit senses something more. When you hear these things, right, it gets stored in your subconscious. You get a kind of comfort with mocking Jesus or talking about Jesus in a way that's not, where he's not that big a deal. You just get more comfortable with. That is a part of occult mind control on the population. And so another thing Jesus did, I don't know, I forget which song it was, but you could look it up, it's super easy to find. He had some song where, when it's played backwards, it says, I hate to even say this, right? But I want to say it so you understand. So it says, murder Jesus, and it says 666. So that's like really on the nose. So I feel like the demons would have told them, like, okay, like don't make it that obvious, right? We have to at least pretend like we're, happy and we're fun and things like that. So he did it like really on the nose. It just went directly to the source, which is Jesus Christ. Another thing I imagine they would probably often pretend is like, oh no, there's nothing special about Jesus. They want us to at least think there's nothing special about Jesus. So even if we're on their trails, right, we're hot on their trails and we realize, oh, demons are trying to influence us, you can imagine they would even want to make it seem like, they would want us to catch them trying to talk about some other entity like, Muhammad or Buddha or something, which you almost never see that, right? It's always Jesus, right? Because Jesus Christ is king, right? So he's the truth. And so you'll always see demons mocking. You kind of see this constant thing in Hollywood where they're constantly mocking Jesus, right? Because that gets people more comfortable with thinking of Jesus not in the way he actually is, which is Jesus. Like I said, when you have a relationship with Jesus, it's amazing, but when you start to really get directions in your mind, which we'll talk more about that later, right? Jesus is very authoritative, and God the Father as well. Like they don't play that, right? Where you kind of not thinking about them, or you thinking about them in this kind of lower way. They'll tolerate that to a point for people who aren't in a state of knowing, because they don't know any better, right? But when you have a relationship with them, you better shape up, right? Just like the angels, right? So that's just how it is with them. They have a huge amount of authority. But it's not in a bad way. It's in a bad way when it's us who have authority. It's completely different with God and Jesus Christ. But yeah, so you basically better put respect. Like I should say it like that, but you have to show them that respect and that reverence, right? They won't tolerate you just thinking of, you know what I mean? You treating them or thinking about them in some lower way. Like no, that's, you know what I mean? That you better show that respect. But these things they put in society where they're mocking Jesus, they get us to not think of Jesus in that high way, that authoritative way, and that keeps us from him, right? That makes us more likely to engage in sinful, negative behaviors and not charge spiritual energy. So I just want to mention that. So that happens, and that's backmasking. That happens in the entertainment industry. Oh, one other thing I want to mention is that another thing that I believe celebrities do, the ones who write songs, another way they get around this problem of like putting a lot of intention or purity of intention into a song is they just have a demon help them write the song, right? Because now if they're writing a song and the demon is planting suggestions in their subconscious to help them write the song, now the demon's intentions are in the song as well. So I believe that happens. And now the demon is just pure antichrist energy, purely the opposite of Jesus Christ. So when their energy goes into the song and your spirit senses that, now a suggestion will be planted in your subconscious to behave or charge in a way that's opposite the nature of Jesus, right? So that's why you see a lot of celebrities, a lot of celebrities in the music industry and things like that, acting as well, Hollywood, they engage in witchcraft and they talk to their spirit guides or their spirits and all that crap, right? Some of them will change their name. I don't know, I think I mentioned in chapter 5, but some of them change their name. I believe that represents, because they'll get a sense of this other spirit helping them. Some of them may not be entirely aware of it on unconscious level, but they sense it, right? They sense in their spirit that something's there. They know they get compulsions at some point that don't feel like their own, right? Because when you know what's going on, you can kind of recognize them, right? And so some celebrities, you'll notice they just change their name for some reason. They get a new name, right? And with that new name, they're actually referring to this other entity. Some of them willingly increase their connection to the other entity, so it's like they have a different personality now. That's the demon. But yeah, so when the demons help them write songs, right? The demon plants their energy or their intentional signature into the song, and then boom, that song is basically demonic now. And that's why a lot of the negative near-death experiences, they'll talk about negative near-death experiences. They'll talk about how a lot of these songs in Hollywood, people will hear them in hell when they have the hellish near-death experiences, because a lot of them come from demons, right? It's not a problem for demons to make it look, to influence the person and create a song where it's slightly okay on the outside and things like that, but they are separating you from Jesus. That's the main demons don't care about anything else except separating you from God and not carrying out God's plan. That's all they care about. And I can kind of go on and on, right? So another example of a symbol, right? Just the name, even the name you speak is a symbol in the subconscious. It's a word. Like a word is like a very short subconscious path associated with the act of speaking in the superconscious. Like I remember I was watching this video that was talking about, I don't know if I told this story in chapter 5, but I'll just say it now because I re-recorded a lot of videos, so I don't remember exactly what I said in what order. But I remember this guy was saying how he was talking about Lil Uzi Vert. Now, Lil Uzi Vert says that the way he got his name was I think some other story. I think someone said he did something, he was rapping fast like a machine gun or something like that, and he said his name was Lil Uzi Vert. But someone else, another video I saw, said, like, basically they were saying, what does it sound like if you say Lil Uzi Vert fast, right? Lil Uzi Vert, Lil Uzi Vert, Lil Uzi Vert, Lil Uzi Vert, right? So if you keep saying it, it sounds like Lucifer, like that piece of garbage's name, right? And so in other words, a name could be a symbol in the subconscious, and when you speak it, you draw kind of the thoughts related to that, the feelings a person had when they said that name at a later time. So that's another symbol. A demon can put kind of energy in the name itself, and then you summon that energy when you speak it, right? So that's, even like another person was saying, Jay-Z, how he calls himself Hova. So if you say put J with Hova, it sounds like Jehovah, so it's mocking God. And so things like that. So you see stuff like that. That's basically all in, like, hip-hop is full of stuff like that, right? Hip-hop is virtually an infestation of demonic and satanic activity. And you can find stuff like that all day, witchcraft and all that garbage, right? But all of that, a lot of it comes from demons, right? Demons putting negative energy. So that comes from demons influencing people so that hip-hop, the culture, manifests in a way where it's full of satanic and negative energy. And so when other people listen to all this crap, right, they feel this urge, this ambient urge to behave in a way that's not like Jesus Christ. I mean, just think about it, right? If you accept all of these theories, right, and you don't even really have to accept almost any of the supernatural stuff I've talked about, because that's a little bit harder to prove. I feel like spiritual energy is pretty easy, but even stuff we talked about in the first book, which is very direct and easy and you see it every day, right? You really think if you continuously listen to songs that talk about drugs and lust and, ego, I'm the man and I'm better than everyone, and money, getting money and F everyone else, these are all negative frequencies, and they're frequencies that aren't aligned with the Spirit of God. You really think you're going to listen to this stuff all day, charge that energy, then manifest a reality that has God's Spirit in it? Of course not, right? None of that crap is played in. You can think of it as being, I like to think of things as, can I imagine this in heaven, right? You can imagine none of that garbage is going to be in heaven. That is satanic by definition, right? It is aligned with demons, right? And so I don't think I talked, because that video was way too long, so I didn't go into it. But one of the things I mentioned was that, I cut it out the video, but one of the things I mentioned was that black people are, which this is actually going beyond black people now, but black people I always say we're one of the, just like Christians, we're one of the biggest punching bags of demons. Right? And one of the reasons for that is because I believe if society begins to accept everyone who's different, we're one of the most different looking people from everyone else, then that's a society that's where God's Spirit could come in much more easily. So it's very important for demons that everyone hates black people, right? Because that sustains racism, and that's a way of helping society to manifest in a way where God's Spirit doesn't work that strongly in it as a result of our choices. So it's important to hate black people. So you can imagine hip-hop culturally from the metaphysical realm would be a huge target, right? It's what I would do, right, if I was trying to keep a society far away from God. I would do that, and the next thing I would attack is a church immediately. Those are the first two things I would do to keep a society away from God. So I just wanted to mention that, so that, like I said, you can look at, there's lots of videos about Satanism and demons and hip-hop and things like that. There are many near-death experiences. I mean, not just hip-hop, but the entertainment industry as a whole, right? There are many near-death experiences that talk about demons and music and things like that, and that's all related to this stuff, right? So you can look it all up. It's out there. So the last thing I want to cover in this video, so I know it's a long video, the last thing I want to cover are the concept of rituals, right? 4 minutes, I got time. So the last thing I want to cover are the concept of rituals. So rituals, you'll often hear about rituals in the occult and things like that. And so what are they? What are these people doing? You know, sometimes they do it behind closed doors, right? And, I don't know if we call them temples. Sometimes they're associated with Freemasons, right? And they're hidden, and they're, I think occult means hidden, right? But they're hidden and a lot of people don't see it. Why does that happen? What are they doing? Well, I believe I can explain that. So to go over this, it says rituals store negative energy in superconscious paths. Some are meant to be hidden and some are meant to be highly visible for the purpose of amplification. So what is that saying? Well, so according to this theory, right, you can have certain symbols that have energy in them, and that energy gets stored in superconscious. Well, if a lot of people focus on these symbols, they can kind of dilute the energy, right? Which is why if you're a celebrity, you want to kind of control the energy a person's producing. So if you could control their intention, you can control the energy they're charging. So that way you can ensure certain frequencies associated with this symbol. But sometimes you don't necessarily want it to be that elaborate, right? You might want to put a lot of energy or associate some symbol with the high frequency in the superconscious, but you don't want everyone focusing on it because they're going to put their own intentions in it and mess it up and dilute the frequency, right? Or dilute the charge or the frequency is charged up at. So in order to avoid all these people diluting the association stored in the superconscious, you got to keep it hidden, right? So no one knows, right? So this is why a lot of practices in the occult are hidden, right? A lot of the rituals are hidden. And as far as the ritual, remember, the subconscious can also, superconscious can also store superconscious can also store paths, right? So the paths are just a series of ordered subjects or categories, right? So if I'm performing a ritual, let's say I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this, right? In the ritual, that's a path in the superconscious. If I keep performing that path over and over and over and over, this would be similar to listening to a song over and over and over and over again. What's going to happen? If I keep listening to a song, let's even say it's new, I'm going to charge, right? So a subconscious path will charge my subconscious. And the moment I hear that song just a little bit, I'll feel the need to sing along with it, and I'll get all this energy, and I'll be so into the song and sing along and things like that. So the path is charged. If I can keep performing some action and think this while performing the action, I can think another intention while performing this moment of the action, and then in this moment of the action, I think this intention. If I keep doing that over and over and over, a path charges in the superconscious. If I get a path to charge the superconscious, I can use this, I can engage in kind of linear as it relates to these subject series, but I can engage in a particular type of behavior, and that behavior will actually help me to charge energy in a particular way. That's a ritual, right? I think spells work in a kind of a similar way. Those are slightly different. I don't want to talk about in this video because maybe I'll talk more about it in the next video. We'll see. But suffice it to say, for a ritual, you can keep doing that. And if you have a very small group of people who are aware of this particular ritual, they can keep adding energy to it, and it grows more and more and more and more and more and more, right? Now, other people aren't focusing on this. So it's like hidden in the superconscious. Only a few people know how to access it. They know how to focus on anything that accesses this thing and this path in the superconscious. And that energy will help them to charge in a very particular way and manifest in a particular way. And people can choose whatever ritual they want and associate whatever energy they want. Usually those rituals are associated with summoning demons, I believe, and we'll talk more about that component because that has to do with the other process of localization in the superconscious, which we'll talk about in the next video. But I believe that's a lot of what happens. So that's basically how rituals work. That's why a lot of rituals are hidden. They don't want people to see them because they're going to mess up the energy in the superconscious, and they only want a few people knowing about it so they can access it, the energy in the superconscious. Right? If you do it right, even though it's a small people, you can probably get a lot of energy in there if people keep repeating it in a charged space, right? And sometimes I hear in Freemasons, right? So I don't know for sure, right? But I hear in Freemason temples, I guess, right? They will induct or indoctrinate other people into these rituals. So when these other people are engaging in these hidden rituals, they will summon that energy like crazy, and it'll be a shock to their system, and their spirit's going to sense all this energy that they charge from these rituals. So they charged it previously. They charge the subconscious path and the superconscious, and then engage in these rituals. The superconscious compels them very strongly, and they sense in the spirit, and something happens, right? Depending on what the ritual is, right? There's more to it. And now we'll talk about the other component in the next video, which is chi energy. But you can induct people using these rituals, right? So that's how rituals work. Sometimes you want the rituals not to be hidden, right? So, and this is what celebrities are for. Right? Sometimes you can perform a ritual where you perform a song, for example, you help people to focus on a particular frequency, but there's still other aspects to what you're doing that help people to sense something in their spirit. And if a lot of people sense something in their spirit, then they're putting a huge amount of energy into the superconscious, right, at that very negative frequency. Or it'll generally be in an antichrist way because it's based on something demonic. So as an example, right, when you watch, I remember this was years ago, right? So I wasn't watching it, but I saw a video. It was some award show, right? So it was with Sam Smith, right? And it's just so disgusting, right? So he was doing some performance where the word was actually unholy. So you can imagine what type of energy you summon when you speak that word in the superconscious and what your spirit senses. But the word was unholy. And it was basically just a demonic ritual on stage. People will say, oh, it's dancing and it's creating. Oh, I hate that. I really hate when they try to talk about it like that, especially for me, because, everything I think of is in terms of the subconscious. The subconscious has an absolute nature. I don't do the atheist thing where everything's made up and, just random and it's all in our heads, right? Or we just make up random things in our heads and assume it's reality, right? That's what they do. No, I think according to science. So everything's fixed, everything's absolute, everything I'm saying is completely consistent with what's reported in spiritual experiences, near-death experiences, and things like that, right? So when you see all this crap on TV and these stupid performances where there's like demons on stage and just pure evil, and you sense it in your spirit, right? Because your spirit senses these things. Society tries to get you to say, oh no, they'll do the atheist thing. Oh no, it didn't really happen, right? We're being creative, right? That feeling you have of negativity, oh no, that's just, the prunes in society trying to convince you to not express yourself. That's exactly how Satan talks, by the way, right? Everything with Satan is always, it's always painted in terms of freedom and liberation, right? So acting in a way that's not aligned with the Spirit of God, which the highest, most happy, the state you're going to be most happy, the state where you're going to have the most happiness, most joy, most good, most everything, the most perfect society is always aligned with the will of God. So freedom is meaningless, right? If you want the type of, or let me put it another way. It doesn't mean anything if freedom means going against the will of God. If you want goodness and happiness, right? You would just follow God. That's the natural order of the universe. So, of course, Satan knows we don't generally know that, so he'll always paint sort of freedom and going against the natural order as liberation. You're doing what you want, right? Are you going to let these people tell you what to do? Are you going to be controlled, right? So nonsense, and that's what they say for these kind of stupid sort of rituals on stage, right? Like I said, that ritual it was one of the award shows, just purely a demonic sort of ritual. Right? And what they want is this amplification effect of this negative satanic energy. Now, when people see that, just imagine people seeing that over and over and over and over again. You think they're going to be more accepting of Jesus Christ, more accepting of his authority, more in a state where they're trying harder to avoid sin and overcome temptation and pray to God and pray to Jesus, and develop a relationship with them, charge spiritual energy, go out of their way to sort of forgive others and help others who are giving them a difficult time, but they do it. Like, all of these behaviors are less likely if you just keep bombarding people with performances like that, bombarding society. Then you can sort of you cause reality to manifest in a way that has less of God's Spirit in it, or less of his influence in it. So that's another occult technique. That's an amplification type of ritual. You see them with celebrities all the time, right? So if you just look at like, I don't know about, it happens in other places too. Actually, no, it happens in all of pop music. I shouldn't even say that. I know a lot, I've seen a lot of videos about it in hip hop, but I've also seen them about it for pop culture, like with Taylor Swift and things like that. Just look it up. Like, look it up on YouTube, witchcraft in pop music, or, hip hop, and watch the performances. And you're going to see all this demonic the demonic aspects of these performances. And that's done with the help of demons, I believe. And so that your spirit senses the darkness. Now, a lot of it is darkness just by the natural organizational pattern too, right? It's not like always hidden. They just put it right in front of your face, even in the organizational part, and people still listen to it for some reason. They're trained to ignore their own instinct about goodness, right? And that happens because we live in a society based on material superstition, where all of society is pointless and all of life has no meaning and we'll all disappear after death, and all our emotions just come from the mind and everything's just made up. And all that nonsense that they talk about, right? Which is, to me, it was always silly and complete nonsense. I never took it seriously. But yeah, so I wanted to mention that. And the last thing, almost the last thing I want to talk about, there's two more things. So I want to now talk about pagans. So very quickly, just to go over this point, it says pagan rituals increase a person's connection to some negative entity. So that's something I believe also happens as well. And so there are many pagan religions out there, right? Wicca or Wicca is one that's well known for witchcraft, but there are many others. And so where do they come from? Where do these pagan beliefs come from in the history of pagan sort of religions? Well, I believe that not all of them for sure, but I 100% believe that some of them have just come from demons. Right? Demons have always been around. They've been around since I imagine, since almost the beginning of human civilization, or when people were first on the planet. And they don't exist in the same type of time that we do, right? So they're in spirit realm. They got hundreds of years to plan their attacks and do everything, right? So they've always been around, influencing people. I imagine at some point someone channeled, or at the level of intuition, they channeled and tried to contact some spirit or something. Demons love when people do that, right? Because you're supposed to reach out to God, right? And we'll talk a little more about this later, because that has to do with another metaphysical law. But when people reach out to the spirit realm and spirits, and they want to know information in this illegal way, demons love when people do it, and they reach out to them and they accommodate them and they start teaching them stuff, right? And so if they can make that connection with a person, then they'll start teaching that person things. And I believe that many pagan rituals were born out of channeling. Some person channeled at some time in traditional society. Some demon, responded, right? Took up the phone call, right? Because it's like you were dialing a number into the spirit realm, and some demon answered the call and just started talking to you, right? And so they gave you all these ideas about, some spirit or some gods or whatever, right? Because they want to be God. They want people to worship them and think of them as God. So they did that, gave people some type of information or whatever, and then the people started worshiping them. So they'll worship images that are the likeness of these demons. But another thing the demons do, again, based on my understanding of metaphysics, this is what I would do, right? If I were in the spirit realm trying to get people to increase their connection to me, they get people to engage in almost like rituals. Now, we would call them traditions, right? So almost like ritualistic traditions associated with pagan religions or pagan holidays, right? And so what does that mean? Well, let's say I have some pagan ritual where every day or which I know it's not that often, but just as an example, you can say every day or every week, I go outside and I say this 3 times, and then I throw like a 4-leaf clover somewhere or a 3-leaf clover or whatever, right? I'm just thinking of something totally random. Why would that be important to a demon? Well, because these rituals, right? Or let's take one a little more accurate, right? Halloween. Right? On Halloween, what do? We focus on very dark things. Now you might say, well, psychologically, sometimes it could be fun to focus on dark aspects of our psychology and our mind and things like that. And I understand that to a degree, right? I don't think it's inherently wrong or evil to do that, but it still can be the case that that's done right in a way that inherently or historically has been associated with demons, right? And that's what I think Halloween is. I don't know. To be fair, I don't know the history of Halloween, but I have heard people talk about this as well in the spiritual community. People who have gone to Jesus Christ from New Age. They'll talk about I forget how they came to this knowledge, but they'll talk about their understanding of Halloween as well. So on Halloween, we focus on many dark, evil things. That adds a huge amount of energy to the superconscious on that particular day, right? And those practices increase our connection to demonic entities, right? So that they love days like that when people do that. If we have a pagan ritual where you're constantly doing this, engaging in this behavior, right? If the energy associated with that a ritual is basically a series of behaviors, right? And those series of behaviors form a subconscious path in the superconscious or superconscious path. So if you engage in that series of behaviors, you're increasing your connection to the demonic entity. Because those are the same behavior. A lot of other people were focused on a demonic entity where they were focused on that behavior. So when you engage in that behavior, you feel an increased urge to focus on this demonic entity. So pagan rituals help people to keep their connection to some demonic entity, or increase their connection, and make it so another entity could connect to them more. And so the whole pagan religion and holidays or whatever will be focused around very particular symbols. All of these symbols increase your connection to the demon because they store that negative energy, right? And so that's why a lot of, like I think I mentioned it before, when a lot of people go out of New Age, actually we're going to talk a little more about this in the next video, but a lot of people go out of New Age and things like that, they will, they'll burn a lot of their, those kind of New Age. Actually, no, I don't know if I covered it yet. Yeah, because like I said, I re-recorded this. I'm going to talk more about it in the next video. But suffice it to say, a lot of these pagan holidays and rituals, God will a lot of times tell you to get rid of the objects themselves because they store that negative energy, right, when people come back to God and Jesus Christ. So, one other thing I want to mention is that, in South America, I don't remember the exact details of the god and things like that, but in South America, right, so back in the day, in the age of exploration, I guess, when Europeans found South America, they found something very strange and disturbing, right? So the Mayans or the Aztecs, it was like one of them, or it could be both of them, they found that they were very deeply engaged in human sacrifices, right? It's very important and very big in their culture. That's a horrible thing, right? Where did that come from? Well, they were doing this to please their gods, right? They were sacrificing their people, I imagine also kids, to their gods for whatever reason, right? Where does that come from? Well, I 100% believe the origin of that was some idiot, right? Channeling some spirit. They channeled some demon. That demon, increased their connection to this person, and that person was proselytizing to the people. So he was some cult leader, told them about this new religion, and then at some point, the demon got them to start sacrificing their kids. Now, God is still there helping these people, but, they have free will. They can choose to believe in this evil if they want to, right? And so that's where I believe that came from. So a lot of people look at that and say, oh, they were just sort of, traditional, simple-minded people. No, I do not think that. In fact, I think that many people back in the day had more intelligence than us today by far when it comes to spiritual things. Now, I'm going to talk more about why I say that later in the chapter when we talk about the law of happiness, right? Because there's something I'm going to cover there. But I think by far they were way more intelligent than us when it came to spiritual and metaphysical concepts. So I don't see traditional people as just, they were stupid and we're so much better today. I don't think that, for a second. And that's what I mentioned about the near-death experience with Jesus. I think Jesus, according to the near-death experiencer, Jesus said the same thing, right? People back in the day, it was much easier for them to accept that they needed a savior as they spiritually awakened more and more and more. It was very natural for them to say, oh man, I need a savior. I need someone to help me have a relationship with God. Exactly, right? That's a foreign concept today. We all think we're all good enough and we're all moral and we're all good people. No, right? That's what I realized. As I came closer to Jesus Christ, I need a savior, right? That's what you're supposed to realize. So So that's mostly it. The last thing I want to cover, I'm kind of just rushing through things because the video is really long, is this component right here. So it says here that churches create positive energy nodes. So very important, right? So we talked a huge amount about negative energy nodes, but what's a positive one? Well, a positive one, like I said, is not just thinking positive emotions, it's focusing on God, charging spiritual energy, and following God's will. Now, what is a condition where a huge amount of people come together and they focus on particular symbols and they're focused on God while focusing on those symbols? Well, it's the church, right? It's the church community, right? That's why churches, and it's not just churches, it could be places of worship in general, but that's why they're so important, right? People, well, atheists, they're the only ones really, but people who don't believe in this stuff, materialists, they will think that churches and places of worship, or they're all stupid and, they just believe in this stuff to cope with the, meaninglessness of existence, and there's no reason for any of us to be here. We all got here magically by random chance. That's what they think, right? And so they think that people just do this in a waste of their time. No, right? And many atheists will admit this when they come to God. They will say they felt this feeling, this connection to God from the church. Like exactly, because they're sensing something in their spirit, because it turns out metaphysics is real. It doesn't go away just because you close your eyes and pretended it didn't exist, right? But my point is that churches and places of worship, they're part of the natural order of society. Right? If you are manifesting a realm that has God's Spirit in it, that realm will have churches and places of worship. Because those will be the locations where people come to focus on God. And that adds more spiritual energy to the planet, to the superconscious. And all that spiritual energy helps people to behave more like Jesus Christ. So it's a wonderful thing for people to come there and do that. Now, other things that do that are like Christian bands and Christian songs or Christian pop music, right? That's what I listen to, right? All those things help to add spiritual energy to the subconscious and create positive superconscious energy nodes. But you can imagine they unfortunately are rare, right? Especially demons love attacking the church, right? Like I said, the high-ranking demons, they don't waste their time too much with the little people. Like I said, God told me that I came up on the radar of these high-ranking demons, which is interesting. But most of the time, they don't deal with us, right? They like to deal with the governors, the rich people in society, celebrities, and the church. They want to attack the church because, like I said, it's what I would do if I wanted to keep people away from God. They put a lot of their resources into attacking the church to prevent people from charging that energy node. Because that energy node is going to cause reality to manifest in a way, and it's going to have sociological conditions that make it much harder for demons to influence and impact society and the people. These energy nodes really help them because they create pressure on people's subconscious to behave in a negative way. So I mentioned they would put a huge amount of their resources into attacking the church. Like I said, it's what just the first thing I would do if I wanted to keep people from God is I would attack the church and get them to not think of Jesus in the way he actually is, right? It's the most important thing I would do. And I believe that's a lot of what you see. And I know there's a lot of churches around, but their reputation is very much attacked with the corrupt pastors, with the things that go on with children in the Catholic Church and things like that. And so people lose confidence. That's a horrible thing, right? To get a church that's really creating positive energy nodes, you want it to be a church that is really led and guided by the Holy Spirit. To get that, you have to have people who truly have a relationship with Jesus, right? And unfortunately, that is not as common, right, as we'd like it to be, even in the church. So yeah, that's what I want to talk about. Like I said, it was a long video, but there's a lot to cover. I could have broken it up, but I just decided to put it all in one. In the next video, we're going to talk about the second type of way you could get localized energy in the superconscious. And like I said, that has to do with chi energy. So yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.